Yeah, waking up in the hospital was the most, the saddest thing ever, um, for me, to realize I had committed this horrific crime.
Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I'm going to be doing an interview today with Wayne Boatwright. Wayne is an attorney who had, uh, basically had an alcohol problem. He ended up getting a DUI and went to prison, and has a very interesting story, a different type of story than I'm typically used to, or different type of story that I'm typically used to kind of delving into. And let's check it out. So, tell me about where you were,
Sure,
yeah, where you were born, where you were raised, like.
sure, Matt. Everybody's got their own story, right? And there's no doubt I have one. I look at myself as kind of like the American dream story. Um, I was raised by a single mother in California. We lived up and down the state, as far north as Mendocino, as far south as Long Beach, and everywhere in between as we moved around a lot. I've lived in a trailer park, right? I've lived above a gas station in an apartment, raised on government assistance. But I had a real focus and a natural intelligence that allowed me to, go to college and ultimately go to Cornell Law School and become an Ivy League attorney. So I've had quite an adventure in life, and I look at my prison journey as another facet of that adventure. I think the biggest surprise to me, though, and I've been home 3 years now since prison, is that I didn't realize my the 6 years, 3 months I spent in prison would turn into a life sentence. And I think I found in a lot of ways that it has, even though I've been back 3 years. And what do I mean by that? For example, uh, I've been on 3 years. I've worked 26 different jobs in the 3 years I've been back. Um, from
Whoa.
That's right,
Wow.
house sitting, cat sitting, uh, you know, a host at a restaurant. Right now, I'm working at a catering company. Now, don't get me wrong; it's a nice catering company. I worked in an event where Bill Gates came, right, and the Goo Goo Dolls were playing. I mean, and all that, and I dress up nice. But I'm a glorified butler.
Right.
I got an Ivy Law School degree, and I'm a glorified butler because that's the best job I can find to do that. And I do a bunch of stuff in the techie slash nonprofit space. So I'm a web manager and a web developer for a number of different websites as well. So it's not all manual labor, but none of it is anywhere near the life that I led before uh, I went to prison.
Okay. Well, let's. So, I mean, when you, all right, when you grew up and eventually, I mean, obviously you go to college and everything. I'm just wondering, like, were you a good student in high school?
Yeah, it's interesting how life works, right? Uh, I I think, and you can resonate with this. Money was a big issue to me.
Mm.
When you grow up in scarcity, as I did, it becomes very important to be able to take care of yourself
Right.
in the best way you can think of doing it. Um, so I was a middling B student in high school, mainly because I was working all the time. As soon as I turned 16, I had a regular job working 20, 30 hours a week at a 7-Eleven. You know, um, my last year in high school, I went to the school about 2 periods a day and worked the rest of the day. I could work study, it was called, to allow me to get out and work and earn money. And that was important to me. Um, but I was working in a machine shop, doing using a drill press and a lathe and stuff like that. Um, I think what got me motivated to actually go back to school and get a college degree, and I started at LA Valley College, right, the basic level, took all the remedial courses again, and then realized it wasn't going to get me to where I wanted to go, so I went to Cal State Northridge, and that didn't help me as much as I wanted, as my dreams were. So I ended up getting my degree at a place called BYU in Utah, um, and got a degree in economics and a minor in international relations and Spanish, and was a really good student by then. I was getting straight A's, right, and that's what led me to go to apply to law school and be able to get a number of good offers and selected Cornell, um, which was an amazing experience for me. I mean, I was a West Coast kid. I'm I'm a fourth generation Californian, Matt. I mean, my mother and grandmother were both born in San Francisco. My family's been here a long time. So trust me, going to an East Coast town in upstate New York was a real cultural change for me. But I've had a number of those. You know, I lived in Argentina for 2 years. I lived in Korea for 6 years. Um, as an attorney, I had a global position at a publicly traded company called Accenture for a couple of years, and in the Bay Area, I've done a lot of work with startups, mainly. You know, a lot of the tech startups that you think about prior uh, to my crime. Um, and I think that suited me well for prison life, believe it or not. I looked at prison as going to a new country. It's like, I don't know anything. I don't know how people think. I don't know how they work, but I'm going to be observant and be open to change and figure out how I can survive in what I think is I went to San Quentin, which is quite a famous prison here in California. We have our death row for California in San Quentin. It's a lot of people who are called lifers, so they've got serious violent crime behind them, and that's why they're at San Quentin. So I felt like I was, back in the savannah in Africa, where everything you're both hunting and you're the hunted by just about everything in the world. And so that was a very different world for me. I grew up in a nonviolent, grew up. I lived the upper middle class life.
Right.
Owned a house, had a good job, had a wife, had kids. And so prison was a whole different world to me. I didn't know anybody who'd ever gone to prison before I went there.
Well, let's go back to you graduated college.
Oh yeah. So for me, I wanted to see the world was my real philosophy. I've always been an adventuresome sort. Like I said, I went to Argentina for a couple of years. I did that before college because I was curious about the world. Um, and when you grow up in the way I did, the first time I got on a plane was when I was going to Argentina. I was 19 years old. Yeah, I'd never been on an airplane before that. So I really was having a new experience, but that meant a lot to me. I philosophically, so I was a business lawyer, not a. Most people see lawyers on TV and they're criminal lawyers or litigators. That's not my thing.
Yeah, it's super sexy. Being a lawyer
exactly.
looks like it's very sexy, and the truth is, it's not.
No, and that wasn't what interested me. I wanted to. I think a philosophy that stuck with me is I wanted to make the world a better place, and I felt that being a corporate lawyer, helping people do business around the world, was a way to do that, and that's what got me interested in law school in the first place. And I got to tell you, again, when you come from a humble beginnings, as we like to say, you do anything you can to scratch by. When I was in law school, for example, I was a house father at a sorority. So Cornell's got a big Greek system. So I was an older male. I was married at the time, and so me and my wife were working as the live-in house parents for 40 girls, right, who are there at college. But that's the way you pay the bills, and I wanted to do that because I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to learn how to gain a profession. I didn't know that from my family experience. This is theory in practice, right? But people who are successful tend to have a profession. Therefore, I'm going to get a profession. Was how I got there. It wasn't like my family had that, and I learned from them. I've done having 26 jobs right now is nothing to me. I've done so many different things in my career, both as a lawyer and before becoming a lawyer, that it's easy for me to find work. But that's the kind of philosophy I come from. My family actually came to America in the 1600s. They were what are called French Huguenots, which were French Protestants that were evicted from Catholic France. And so they came over to America. And so we got kind of that old WASP ethic, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant ethic. Work hard, don't be proud, don't promote yourself, but, be a good person, be a good citizen. Mm-hmm. Was always been part of my value system and something that was important to me. And that includes having being able to take care of yourself. So I've always been able to take care of myself. I mean, like I said, I was working from 16 on. But let's just say that when I was a lawyer, I was better able to take care of myself and my family than I can now, right?
So, all right. So you got married. Were you still in college when you got married?
Oh my gosh, I was naive
Right.
as a young man. I got married at 21. I married an older woman. Um,
What's an older woman?
she was only 24,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh, okay.
But she'd been working for a long time. She was my manager at the bank I worked at. So I was working as a teller at the time, and I was in love, as 21-year-olds are. And yeah, I got married at 21. It was still going to college and starting that world all over again and trying to figure out where to go with it. Yeah, I was you hustled in a different way than I did, but trust me, I was hustling in my own way to make it through life, and I was doing pretty well. When I mentioned, coming from a simple family, my first car was a 1972 Ford LTD, an 8-cylinder with a bench seat because you wanted to go to drive-ins back then. That's how old I am. I mean, I'm 60. People don't get this stuff. I used to go to drive-ins, and you wanted a girl to be able to sit next to you. You don't want bucket seats. You want a bench seat so that can happen. Um, yeah, I had a stable life by a single mother, but a humble one, and that prepared me for moving on, and that included getting married, um, which I thought was the right thing to do at the time. Um,
Well, all right. So you graduate college. You went on to law school. How did you go right into law school, or?
yeah, yeah, I went straight into law school. I figured that's what I wanted to do, and law school was a great experience. Biggest difference for me as a West Coaster who went to public high school. I went to LA Unified Public High School. I mean, I had English teachers who were too lazy to teach. They'd ask us to play board games like Monopoly during the class when I went to public high school. You get back east and you go to a place like Cornell, you got a lot of these kids who went to private boarding school and small liberal arts colleges. They are so much more, they were so much more prepared for the college experience. How to articulate an argument, how to express themselves clearly in written form and oral form than I was. That I had a lot of catching up to do when I got to law school. I think that was the first time I realized I wasn't the smartest guy in the room,
Right.
and I think you can appreciate that, right? That a lot of people you can just kind of run rings around, and that's when I learned that no, you can't do that here. So law school was a real eye opener for me. Like the first time I ever got a C in college, right? In college, high school, I was an average student, but by the time I got to college, I was studying hard. Um, and law school was a different experience for me.
Yeah, I did much better in college than I did, and I was pretty much straight A's in college, as opposed to high school, which I just skated by with C's and B's.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it didn't matter, right? It
Yeah,
was high school. I was like,
I didn't think I was going to go to college. So, but once you got out of college, you went to law school. Like when you graduated law school, like how did you go about finding a job? And
oh yeah. So law school's it's a very unique environment when you're going to um, an Ivy League law school, to be honest, right? So you're everybody's looking to hire you when you come out of there. So I had originally planned on going to DC because I liked a lot of the international stuff. In fact, my focus in law had a lot to do with international relations and things like that. So that was my plan. I ultimately went to LA to work because my family was having a lot of problems and I needed to go back to help them. I think that's a constant theme in my life. I got kind of like survivor syndrome after I got out of my family environment, but I
yeah,
kept having to go back to that environment, mainly to help my family who were getting into different trouble. So I was working in LA, and I had that LA law lifestyle. I had a new car, I had a good life, um, but it wasn't satisfying. I wanted the international stuff. I think the most interesting thing for me was 2 years into my law career, I decided to pack up with my wife and move to Seoul, Korea. Um, Korea only had 5,000 attorneys in the whole country, and they've got like, 45 million people. So there's not a lot of lawyers out there. But I felt like it would be a good opportunity for me to do what I really wanted to do, which was to work in the world and be part of this international community and world. So yeah, 2 years after being a lawyer, I packed up and moved to Korea. Never been to Asia. I hadn't done anything like that. I said, what the hell? I want to see what this is like. Brought my wife along
Did you
as
work for a
well.
company? Were you transferred with a company, or did you just go?
Oh no, I got a job from the dominant law firm in Korea.
Okay.
These guys make $1 billion a year in legal fees right now. I mean, it's a big company now. But yeah, I went over there as what's called a foreign legal consultant, and I loved it. And I I loved trying to cross those boundaries and those barriers of culture, of education, of nation, of ethnicity that you get to do. I mean, I found that same thing when I was in Argentina, of just how different um, that country is to America. Korea was also very different than the American standard. And so I got a chance to go there and experience that, as well as work with all these international companies. I mean, I met George Soros when I was in Korea. I met Michael Bloomberg when I was in Korea because their companies were coming into that market. And I was a foreign legal consultant that worked with their companies as they were entering that market. It was amazing. Shoot, I partied with Stevie Wonder and his crew after a concert one night because I was a white guy in Korea. They didn't know anybody, so they asked me to come sit with them. And you know, we got to have a really good time. I even, shoot, I was in a Cass beer commercial in Korea. It's one of their top beers, kind of like their Coors, you know, where they brought you to do stuff. So yeah, you get to do a lot of crazy stuff when you're overseas as an expat, and I loved it. It was a good life.
So your wife is there. Did you have kids by that point, or?
Um, this will sound crazy, but fortunately we didn't. She had she had endometriosis, so she couldn't have children. We found out as we were going through a number of studies. You know, it's funny uh, when you work at a hard job in Korea. You work 6 days a week in a suit. You work Saturdays, right? You work at night late. Um, I was working really hard when I was in Korea. My wife couldn't really find a job, so she was working as an aerobics instructor in Korea. And I think I worked too hard for her, so she fell in love with somebody else, and we ended up getting a divorce when I was in Korea. Now my second wife, my second wife says I didn't work hard enough, so I figured I haven't gotten the balance yet between how much you work and how much you don't, right? But yeah, you know, Korea was hard for her because she didn't have a big community to be part of like I did. You know, I had work, I had all the other stuff that I was doing, and she was in a more isolated experience there than I was. But hey, I mean, that was her choice, I'm lucky in a way because I ended up remarrying, and now I've got two kids. One just started college. In fact, he's going to my alma mater. He started school today. Today is his first day as an undergrad at Cornell University. So trust me, I'm a lucky man. I'm a lucky man with my kids, and and that divorce wasn't the end of me. But you know, I found that I had to give up a lot. Uh, um, Divorce, both my divorces, and then my crime are probably those three events where you find you lose a part of yourself. Uh, with my first divorce, I lost my faith and I lost my religion, for example. Um, my second divorce came 4 months into my prison sentence. And so I lost my family, I lost my social network, I lost my profession with that. Um, and by committing my crime, as you know, you mentioned I had a DUI, but it's a lot worse than that, right? I killed someone
Right.
as a drunk driver. I took a life. Um, uh,
Well, I mean, I hate to interrupt, but I mean, did you have an alcohol problem? Was this was an alcohol problem and not an isolated event where you had a few too many drinks? This was something that you had been struggling with. Am I right? No, yes,
yes,
no.
no, yes, yes, but not consciously, right? I'm the functional alcoholic, right?
Right.
Like I drink too much at parties, or I drink a full bottle of wine at dinner, not realizing that it made me vulnerable to that day, right, or to that event that comes with that. Yeah, alcohol was something I never really got into. I first started drinking at 33, so it wasn't like it was something I I had grown up with in my family or knew a lot about. But I got steadily worse. To be honest, uh, as a I call myself, so I was a lawyer, but in a lot of ways I was a businessman. So one of the big things I did I was after I was on my own as an independent lawyer was I did a big project of a 723 unit condominium development in Las Vegas. And I brokered this deal, and I was asked to become the general counsel of their team as we built this big project in Vegas. Trust me, all those things you hear about Vegas pales compared to what really happens when you're going there every week and you become a local. The vodka Red Bull became my drink of choice, um, and a bump every once in a while became the other way that you kept things in balance in Vegas, and so that became a habit that made me vulnerable to my crime. Right, didn't destroy my life before my crime. Was still married, I had kids, I was working, having money, but yeah, alcohol became a worse and worse problem for me as time went on. But it wasn't a conscious recognition that it was really bad. I just thought that I'm still partying, so what? I'm having fun like everybody else.
So there was never nobody ever tried to cartel your drinking. There was no rehab stints, no.
Yeah, none of that.
No.
None of that. And I told you I was an old school WASP. You carry your own water.
Right.
You don't look for help. Right? Even if you know you have a problem at some level, it's your job to deal with it, not anybody else's. What happened to me was where I fell off the cliff wasn't just my crime. It was like a 6-month process because my mom had fallen and broken her hip. She was still living in LA with my special needs brother. And I had to make multiple trips down there. So over a 4-month period, I was driving from San Francisco to LA to get her and my brother out of there, to get her hospice stabilized so that she would, hopefully get better. But also to get her and my brother into an assisted living facility. And I had to do that on my own. So I was driving down there a lot. And I thought alcohol was a good way to help self-medicate through that
Right.
process, right? As I was going down there again and again to deal with that. In fact, the night of my crime was the day that I had checked them in to an assisted living facility. And I was cleaning out their apartment that day after they had left, so they'd have their precious things that they wanted to keep. And I thought drinking Red Bull vodkas was a good idea. And when I say drinking, I'm talking like a bottle of vodka, right? We're not talking. By then, I was drinking heavily. And then after I cleaned out their place, I thought it was a smart idea to try to drive home drunk. Kept drinking when I was driving, to be honest. And had an accident my accident happened on the 5 freeway, and my crime happened on the 5 freeway. I had a head-on collision with another car and killed someone about 2 hours into my drive back to San Francisco. So yeah, alcohol was a problem, right? But not one I fully appreciated. And what really made it worse was trying to deal with these family issues on my own, and not realizing I needed help to deal with those issues.
So did you pass out? Did you just wake up in the hospital and they told you?
Yeah. I woke up. I fractured my pelvis, broke my neck, I shattered my foot. I've got a plate and 8 screws in my foot. Yeah, I was pretty heavily injured as well. They medevac us to a hospital. But I killed someone. I was hurt. No, again, the old WASP thing. I don't think I had cried since I was 18 years old. But when I found out I had killed someone, I was devastated. I'd taken a life, and there's no coming back from that in a lot of ways.
Well, I have a question. Like, how did you? Okay, you wake up in the hospital, and does an officer tell you?
Yeah.
Are you wake up and you're handcuffed to the bed, or do they just say, hey, like, were you arrested immediately?
They medevaced you to the hospital. I met the doctors I met some highway patrolmen at the hospital more than 24 hours after my accident. I had a concussion. I was knocked unconscious for quite a while. No, no, they didn't handcuff me to the bed, but I was in the hospital for over 90 days. I had a fractured pelvis. I wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
I wasn't. My foot had to be reconstructed. I wasn't going anywhere. So no, they didn't handcuff me to the bed. Um, uh, and you're on a lot of morphine, so that kind of helps you get a balance as you go through that process. And this was down in Fresno too. I mean, I'm from San Francisco. It's the middle of nowhere. I was in a place called Kings County um, when I woke up in the hospital. Um, it's interesting. I've done a bunch of um, talks and interviews and AA meetings, stuff like that. You're the first guy to really ask me about my whole life. Most people have just started with, my crime. So I appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
That means something to me. Yeah, waking up in the hospital was the saddest thing ever for me. To realize I had committed this horrific crime and terminated somebody else's future and destroyed ultimately two families, right? Not just the victim's family, but my family as well.
I was going to ask you, did your wife come down? How did that play out? Like, I mean, you were still married
Yeah,
at this point. You have what, two children?
two
Or
kids, two
two
kids.
kids.
Yeah.
You're in the hospital. You wake up. Do they tell you right away? Listen, the other person died, or he didn't make it, or he's still in surgery. Or is
Oh
it
yeah,
just
they told me all the details. She was alive when they were medevacing her, and she died in the hospital.
okay?
Uh,
Are you
yeah,
concerned
my
at that? I'm sorry. It's just that, like at that time, I get, I understand, you took a life, and that's, and absolutely, I get it. Like, that's like, what have I done? Oh my, you're upset, but there's still self-preservation. I mean, you have to start thinking like, am I going to be charged? I mean, look, this is horrible, but I still have two kids and a wife. Like, and it's horrible. And I know something has to be done, but I need to know what that's going to be. Like, I'm not ready to be, as horrible as you may have felt, there's still survival instinct and mitigating, what happened, because I do have two children that I have to take care of. And look, you could say, like, I know I would say, hey, look, what I did is horrible. I really made a mistake. I'm a horrible person for what happened. I feel horrible about it, but I still have a responsibility. So at what point did you start thinking to yourself, like, what's going to happen to me? Like, am I going to be charged? Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. I knew I was going to be charged. I mean, I
okay,
committed a crime. That isn't the issue. I didn't know what the penalty would be,
right.
right, for that. No, I'd never had a drunk driving, uh, ticket or arrest or conviction. It was a first offense, right? So yeah, I wasn't sure how they'd treat me. I didn't expect what I got. I ended up getting what's called the midterm in the end of that process. So I got 7 years, 8 months for my crime. And I was surprised by that. I'll be honest with you. Um,
You surprised that you felt it was harsh, or?
yeah, I thought if I'm not the low term, I don't know who is, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, here's what
Um,
bothers me about the 7 years is, like, to me, if you'd had a DUI, you knew you had an issue, you'd been to AA, you'd been struggling for years to get your addiction, your alcoholism under control. Like, then it's like, okay, you knew you shouldn't be driving, but you hadn't had any real close calls, or, I drink a little bit, but it's not a major issue. It's not like people are showing up saying, oh, he knows he has a major problem. You just felt like I had a shitty day, and the way I dealt with it was I just drank a little bit, and I didn't think I was too intoxicated, and I clearly was. But so to me, that is the low end. The guy that's been arrested, had several DUIs, knows he's got a problem. Like, that's the guy in the mid to high end.
Well, and now you're talking something about the criminal justice system that I think a lot of normal people don't understand. Their idea of the criminal justice system is watching it on TV, right? CIS or whatever. You convict the
Right.
guy, he's a bad guy. The system is set up to maximize your time in prison,
Right.
not to attain justice in a lot of ways. And I'm lucky. I know guys who've been in prison 40 years. Don't, I'm not complaining
Right.
about getting a sentence of 7 years, 8 months, but it's just, I was told that the only people who got the low sentence in the county that I committed my crime in were police officers. So a
Right.
police officer would get the low end, but anybody else got the mid or the high end. That was just the way it was. Um, but is that fair?
No, but
Probably not to most people, but that's the way the system works in that county. If I committed my crime in San Francisco, it might have been a different thing. Remember, I'm some rich hotshot lawyer driving through town from San Francisco who did this. I'm
right.
not a local
Yeah.
who got there and did it. So my process was probably different than yours. I know that you went through a plea bargain process and you ultimately accepted a plea bargain. I think a lot of people don't know that uh, almost all criminal cases are settled by plea bargain,
Right.
like 95%,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
Don't go to trial. Don't go to court. So you don't go before a jury. I didn't go before a jury. I didn't want to. I was happy to work out an arrangement and save the state the expense and process of going to court. So being a lawyer, I was smart enough to hire two lawyers, one to deal with the civil side and one to deal with the criminal side. Um, and, was given bond, was out on bond, right? So I actually, the time between I committed my crime and the time I went to prison was over a year, about a year, 3 months. I was in the hospital for 3 months, and then I was in a wheelchair for 6 months, and then a walker, and but I was trying to drag out that process so I was healthy enough to go to prison. I didn't want
Right.
to go to prison in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh,
I'm
so
sure
I
you.
drug that process out and was able to do that from home, right after
Right.
my 90 days.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen the level of care that you get in prison as far as medical is concerned. Like you do not want to get sick in prison.
No,
I mean,
you
these
do not.
guys. Yeah.
No.
That
Well,
was
I've
something
seen
I
so many
learned right
guys
away.
die. I've seen so many guys die in prison.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it's not just, there's a lot of death from cancer or illness. There's some death from violence. Shoot, my prison in San Quentin, there were 29 guys who died from COVID, for heaven's sake. The prison only has 3,500 people.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't want to have to deal with that. Um, uh, and I was able to work through that process long enough to get healthy enough to go to prison where it wasn't obvious. Another thing about prison, I said it was like the savannah. You don't want to be an injured person going to prison because
No.
that just makes you a target. You're just a victim to go after. And I don't care if you're injured emotionally or because you have a drug addiction or because you got a physical problem. Any of those means that they'll try to cull you out of the herd and take you down
Right.
in one way or another. And unfortunately, I know a lot of guys who couldn't get over their addiction and they just stayed addicted through prison, right? It's easy to get what you need in there, believe it or not. But that's an example of what I mean. It's not just they're going to kill you, they're going to take advantage of you. I wanted to make sure I could minimize that risk.
So you were at home for 9 months?
Over a year, yeah,
Okay. So
about a year.
what so I mean, how'd your wife and kids, like, what were they going through? I mean, kids are pretty resilient, they may or may not really understand what's happening, but your wife clearly knows what's happening. She knows there's going to be some issues.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting. The kids were really young at the time, um, uh, 5 and 7, for example. So they knew Daddy was injured, and so I just had to make sure that they knew I would be okay, that I was recovering. we did sit down with them about the crime once I knew that the sentencing would be a significant time and I'd be going away, to explain to them, that it wasn't just an accident that happened, that I committed a crime, and that when you commit a crime, society judges you, and that judgment usually includes taking you away from society, away from family, and putting you in prison. They didn't know what those terms really meant, but
Right.
we had the discussion with them. And that was important to me, to be a father that helped kids understand that as a citizen, you have a responsibility to society. It's not just society protects you with your rights. You have responsibility, and I had violated those, and so I had a price to pay for it. That was the way I explained it to them. You know, wife, she had a hard time with it. I had not just committed a crime and taken a life. I had shamed her by being a criminal, um, and that was hard for her to take. You asked how I felt when I found out I committed a crime, and I said I broke down and I was crying and stuff. Um, I'll be honest with you. When my wife came to visit me in the visiting room 4 months into my prison sentence and told me we were going to get a divorce, that hit me harder than taking a life, um, in a lot of ways, because I didn't see it coming. Um, I
Oh,
thought we were going to get through the prison time and have that kind of safe, solid marriage, but we didn't, and I didn't realize it. And I almost got myself shot that day because I was, you have to have the ducat, it's called, to move around in prison. And I was in an area that I wasn't allowed to be in because I was just despondent, crying and despondent. Um, and, I was lucky that they were more understanding than I appreciated them being at the time, um, when I was out of bounds, as it
yeah.
were, that day. Yeah, that was hard for me. Um, I smile about it now because I kind of take the philosophy like the ancient Greek um, uh, plays that they would do. Life is equal parts tragedy and comedy. Um, and what you don't realize is that a tragedy, if you live long enough, becomes a comedy later on, right? You can laugh at it or you can smile about it. How silly you were or how ridiculous the things were you did at
Oh,
the
yeah.
time.
I I
Um,
I do it all the time.
right? You gotta. Oh
Yeah.
my God, how did I do that?
Yeah. Well, like
Uh,
even when I tell my story, I constantly kind of have these moments where I think, what the fuck were you thinking? Like you had so many opportunities. Like I'm keep getting to these opportunities where I could have done the right thing. Like there were so many better choices. You made that one. Like what were you? The arrogance. And I always relate it to, in my case, I always relate it to just a pride. Like my
yeah,
pride has gotten me in every major screw up I've ever made has been specifically related to my pride.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I don't know, if yours, what your, catalyst, what your issues, are, but mine has always been just arrogance, pride, just, you know, I don't know. But
That's the heart of it. That is the heart of it. You're absolutely right. You think you're God's gift to the world, uh, in some ways, right? Um, uh, yeah, I went through that same process. But I so when I say I lost my family with my crime, I didn't lose it at the crime. I lost it 4 months later,
right.
uh, when I was getting divorced. But I'm also an honorable man. My divorce. We So I was successful, and I know you know what it's like to have the court impose financial obligations on you because of your crimes. In my case, I had a small criminal penalty and a big civil suit that was going on. I settled with my victim's family. Um, the settlement was $1.55 million for the life I took. Um, $1 million of that was insurance, and then the rest I had to cover. Um, and 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 so that was taken care of before I went to prison. But the rest of my assets, I just were for my kids' upkeep, right? I mean, I wasn't going to be able to pay alimony or child support from prison. So I found out 6 months in, after we went through the process of my prison sentence, that I would be coming out just like everybody else from prison with $233 gate money plus whatever else I could save. All the rest of my assets were basically my settlement, and I was happy to do it for my kids. My kids didn't do anything wrong. Why should they have to pay for that penalty? But my family didn't meet me at the gate when I got out. I mean, I was divorced. Even though I got to tell you, I had a good friend of mine who met me. I told you I lived overseas for quite a while. He had lived in Korea as well, and we had become good friends there. He met me at the gate. And, you go have a nice breakfast and you buy some new clothes and stuff like that. And he asked me, what's the first thing you want to do now that you're home? I said, there's only one thing we have to do. We have to go to a Korean sauna. And he looked at me in surprise, but he knew what I meant. And you probably don't. But a Korean sauna, first of all, you get naked, unisex, right? The men are one side, women on the other. You get naked, you shower off, then you go through 3 different pools from cold to medium to hot in different levels you go to. But the reason I wanted to go there wasn't to get a shower or a massage. They then do what's called a body scrub. And they put on these mittens that are really coarse, and they scrub you from head to toe, take like all those extra layers of skin off. The first thing I wanted to do when I got out of prison was to take off as much of fucking prison as I could. Take off those outer 2 layers of skin, head to toe. So I did that on the first day I got out.
Did you have to go to a halfway house or?
Oh my gosh. Now you went to the federal system, right?
Yeah.
So I went to the state system, and I think a lot of people don't realize that there's one federal system that's nationwide, and then there's 50 different state systems, which are called prisons. You go to prison, but there's also jails, which is the local prison in the city or the county that you belong to, right? So there's really 3 different types of prison that you can go to in America. I was in the state system. Unlike your federal system, which has a halfway house to kind of transition you before you get out, in state prison, you stay in until your sentence is served, and then you get out. Now, I had to return to the county of residence, not the county I did my crime in, so that's San Francisco. So I had an obligation to report to my parole officer. I had 2 years of parole when I got out of prison. And there's a lot of conditions of parole that you have that are stricter than the laws that you have to meet when you get out of a state prison sentence. So I had 2 years of parole, government custody in a way, right, or government oversight. The parole officer said, well, where are you going to stay? And I told him I was still looking into it. And he told me that if I didn't have a place, if I didn't find a place within 2 weeks, I would have to go into a halfway house. Now, halfway house is different than you went to, because in California, to get in a halfway house, you have to be an addict, basically. So the halfway house I would have gone to would have been 6 months of 36 hours a week, classes and training. You're like in prison. You have to be back by 8 o'clock. You can't leave the facilities without a permission slip. You can't look for a job. You can't do anything. And that was a bed that I could stay in. Now, I was lucky because I knew what to expect when I got out. Not when I went in, I had no clue. But when I got out, I had been the managing editor of the San Quentin News newspaper. And we have a circulation of 35,000 throughout the state system. It's a big newspaper, and we write a lot of articles. So I had talked to a lot of people what to expect. And they told me the dumbest, worst thing I could do would be to go to one of those our state halfway house, which is different than your federal one, because it's usually tied to some sort of addiction or other thing that they want you to be treated for. And I was told, whatever you do, avoid that, because you're still in prison. You have like 4 roommates, some of who are active addicts, who are going to want to steal from you, for example. But you can't protect yourself because you'll be in violation of your parole. if you try to do anything to protect yourself from somebody attacking you. So you just got to take it. He says, you don't want to do that. So I hustled to find a place. I was very lucky that I was an active church member before I went to prison. I'd been a deacon and a Sunday school teacher, and my church was able to help me find what's called an in-law unit, which you may not be familiar with, but in San Francisco, you have a little. This was attached to a woman's garage, so it was a little single, bathroom and a little like living room. That's it, right? No kitchen, none of that stuff.
A mother-in-law's unit, or like they call them mother-in-law's unit.
Mother-in-law unit, yeah. And so this woman who I now consider, she should be. I'm not Catholic, but she should be a saint. And
right.
What she did for me, she deserves sainthood, as far as I'm concerned. Because when I got out, with $450 in my pocket, because I had saved up some money from my job and the gate money, she let me stay in her in-law unit, rent-free. I stayed there for 5 months until I could, earn enough money to get my own apartment. So you see, I was lucky that way.
So can we go back to prison? When you went to prison, like what's the first, like what is your first day in prison like? Like, I mean, how are you? Like you walk through the gates, the doors close. Like I'm sure in your mind, is this like in the federal system they have supermaxes, but then you have penitentiaries, you have mediums, you have lows, and you have a camp. They have what levels, like right, a 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. And
yeah, California has levels, but you always start out in jail, right? You don't go to prison. So I spent about 2 months in jail. Now,
mixed with
again, I was an educated man. I knew this was going to happen, so I asked around of how to deal with this, and I was sophisticated enough to find a woman a former warden of a California state prison, who was running a nonprofit. I made a substantial donation to her nonprofit and had her guide me through the process. So a process that takes most people 6 months to a year took me less than 2 months to get to the prison of my choice. And it's a level 2 prison called San Quentin. I chose that because it was closest to my home. That was all that I cared about. Remember, I was still married at the time. I wanted my kids to be able to visit me in prison. I didn't want them to have to drive halfway across the state. There are level 1s in San Quentin prisons, but I went to a level 2. My crime was considered a violent crime because I killed someone. Right. And so the minimum standard is usually level 2 when you commit a violent crime. But I was lucky to go through that process quickly and go to there. County was a hellhole. You got guys who are in prison for who can't get bail and are in prison for years. I was one guy who got murdered, on a murder case. He'd been there for 6 years in the county jail. We had triple tiered bunks, and we had mats on the floor for other guys because it was so full. A lot of people would come in, and they're still high when they get there, but 3 days later, they're in a whole world of hurt as they're waiting there and going through that process. So yeah, jail was a difficult time, but the hardcore stuff was going to prison. So in California, you go to what's called classification after you finish your jail term and you go to prison. So that's where they put everybody together, level 1 through level 4. So I was in classification for 6 weeks, pretty much. And while I was there, the guy next to me had a broken jaw from a fight. I saw guys get hit with what are called block guns. Block guns shoot out like a beanbag, but it's got like a shotgun propellant behind it, so it knocks your ass down. Doesn't kill you, but it knocks you down. I saw guys get stabbed. In my block, which is called an X block because there's 4 different wings to it, one guy got killed, during the time I was there. We were on lockdown the whole time. It was very rare that I got out of my cell where I had one cellie, and we were in there when I was in classification. It was not a fun time. And I, again, because I spent enough time in different environments, I was able to kind of navigate those waters, I think, better than a lot of guys in my situation. But something you didn't have, California is it's a very racist system. I think you had mentioned one of the times that one of your cellies was like a Mexican or Latin or something like
Right.
that. I never had that in prison. My prison were bunkies, right, in the same pair of bunks, or my cellies who were in the same cell had to be white,
Right.
under kind of an unwritten law. So when I first got to prison, it was in January. It's a place called Wasco, and it was Super Bowl weekend. And they were going to let us out to watch the Super Bowl, and I didn't realize that I was. I almost sat. I saw an empty bench, and so I was going to go sit on an empty bench, but it was the black section of the open area, and I'm a white man, so I was gently told that I wasn't allowed to sit there, and that I should go sit with the white guys. But I did a couple dumb things like that, but I learned my lesson pretty quick to abide by the rules in prison, and to make myself useful, not as an ATM machine. A lot of guys who have money in prison, they act like an ATM machine. They get a lot of money and they're giving out gifts to everybody. And that's the way they stay safe. That wasn't a game for me, but I made myself useful, help people write letters, or talk about what their court documents were, stuff like that.
Yeah, I did the same thing. It was the same. Then I ended up getting teaching GED, taught the real estate class for 10 years.
There you go.
You become an important person. And when did you start becoming the editor, or was it the editor or assistant editor? Like,
I was the managing editor. So I had a different, California is about 5% African-American, but the prison population is about 40% African-American. So the prison has a much more African-American vibe in California than you would think, given the population in the state. And I figured these guys need to be the editor-in-chief. You don't need a white guy doing that. So my job was to make sure all the articles were edited and they were on a range of different themes and stuff like that. The managing editor. So I managed the newspaper. That was kind of my service philosophy. When I got to prison, I kind of went through a 3-step process. The first thing I wanted to do was self-realization. I needed to understand how I could commit my crime. Who was I that I could do that? And why did I do that? And then after self-realization, you need to get into self-expression. And self-expression is your ability to communicate with your community. Now, some guys do it with art. Some guys do it with music. Mine was writing, right? I like to do a lot of writing to do that. And then the next stage becomes service, because you want to help others on that journey of self-realization and self-expression. And my concept of service, as well as tutoring guys in math and other stuff, was to be the managing editor of the San Quentin News, because San Quentin's a unique prison. I think it's just like the Silicon Valley prison system. They have tons. COVID has changed everything, but before COVID, we had about 180 different organizations or nonprofits that had active meetings and events inside San Quentin. Most prisons just seem to have AA or NA, and that's it, right? Maybe Al-Anon, that's it. Our prison had a ton of different offerings for people to try to learn about, why they committed their crime and what they could do to make sure they didn't do it again. And so a lot of our articles are about what can be done in prison to prepare yourself for when you get out, prepare yourself for reentry. Think of like nonviolent communication, right? So you can be able to express yourself without having to get violent with people. Understanding your emotions. A lot of times people think they're angry and they're not. They're just frustrated.
Right.
We'll help them understand that. How do you become a better citizen? How do you become a better father? How do you become a better husband? How do you deal with your addiction? How do you get ready for getting a job? There's a lot of nonprofit organizations like that in San Quentin. And I took a bunch of those classes too. So I got to figure out what the fuck was going on with me. I mean, I was so dumb that I was drinking and driving and I killed someone. I wanted to make sure that wouldn't happen again. As my first goal. right? So I did a lot of time of that work of introspection. Who am I? What am I? The way I characterize it is everything is narrative. That's how we understand things. And so the narrative that I created for myself was I you build this psychic delusion house that you live in as a person. And that psychic delusion house is made up of all your beliefs and your philosophies and the way you look at the world. And I had burned down my psychic delusion house with my crime. I wasn't this great, smart, good citizen lawyer. I was a murderer, right? I'd taken a life. And so I spent a lot of my time in prison rebuilding my psychic delusion house as an adult instead of the one I had built up over my life um, that existed before, that had led to me thinking I could drink and drive or not caring that I was putting others at risk is probably a better way of characterizing it. And I didn't want to have to be in that process again. Now, a lot of people like to dance to the 12 step, so they think that AA is the only solution. I'm not an AA guy per se. I think AA keeps you focused on your addiction. And I think NA keeps you focused on your addiction. My goal wasn't to guard against my addiction. I wanted to change who I was so my addiction no longer had power over me. So like after I got out, I worked in a high-end restaurant with a celebrity chef. Chris Costino, he's won Top Chef Master, very famous guy. I knew a lot of guys in the restaurant industry who were good friends. So say, hey, you gotta get a job. They had 2 bars. I didn't have a problem. I don't have a problem with drinking. I've been out 3 years. I'm not worried about it because I can go to a bar and not worry about drinking. And I'm afraid a lot of guys in AA still worry about their addiction. That wasn't my thing. I kind of rebuilt my psychic delusion house in a different way. I didn't follow the design that AA gives you to rebuild your habits and your beliefs so that you can survive.
So once you got out, what's with all the different jobs?
I didn't expect that. I got to tell you, so think about the startup community that everybody knows about and has heard about, right? And I'm working in that area with a bunch of different companies, doing a lot of different work as an attorney, but also more as a businessman, helping them figure out their businesses. So I went to prison with, after living in the Bay Area for, at that time, 15 years. I had a lot of friends. I had a big network business-wise and social-wise. But my network is that kind of educated, elite, atheist business worker, right? That kind of high mindset. They don't know how to forgive somebody for committing a sin or a wrong. So when I got out, nobody wanted to talk to me. Not maliciously. They didn't know how to interact with me.
Right.
I was something beyond their comprehension. And I would say that that's still true. Of that, I'll give you an example. Even the ones who could interact with me looked at me as kind of a disabled person.
Right.
They didn't want me to be a lawyer again. I got a friend of mine, Angel, has me house sit for her and cat sit, pays me to house sit and cat sit for her. So she trusts me in her house, is my point, right? Absolutely trust me. But she doesn't invite me to her birthday party.
Right.
I'm a disabled person, or like a mentally disabled is the way that my old network still sees me. So when I got out, I had to figure out how to make money to get my own place, because the most important thing for me is not to be a burden to my family or to society, right? So I got out and I started hustling. I've done a couple jobs as a lawyer. I mediated a divorce between a couple, and made some money that way. I worked on the First Step Act, which is part of the federal system, is a big legal change in the federal system, trying to reduce prison populations and get people out passed during the Trump years. So I worked on developing a manual for the First Step Act. I've worked with an organization called Prison Professors to develop like 4 different remote learning classes that you can give people like a manual, and they can go through the lessons and correspond and send back in their answers. I help them do that as kind of an author and an editor and a contributor. So yeah, I've done a bunch of stuff like that. But I got to tell you, even those jobs only pay like 30 to 50 bucks an hour. I think the
Right.
best one I got was 50 bucks an hour. Most of them are like 30 bucks an hour.
So, but so you still have a law degree. You're still a member of the California
Oh my
bar.
God, hilarious. You're going to love this. No, I'm not. If you commit a felony,
Right.
they disbar you. Now, they charge you for the privilege of disbarring you, but they don't disbar you when you're in prison. They wait till you get out. And then you're supposed to have a 6-year time of like cooling off before you can apply for the bar again.
Mm.
So not only am I disbarred, I can't be a lawyer, but I got a $6,000 debt on top of that for the privilege of being disbarred. And remember, I got out with no money. I can't pay $6,000 back.
Right.
I don't have it. So yeah, no, I'm disbarred. I can't practice law as a lawyer. You know, I can provide consulting services to a level. But
can you go to another state and be a lawyer? I mean, you're
only
still
if I take the bar in that state, and only if they allow former felons to get it. Usually, you have to get an exemption to their standards. So you'd have to go to court to get permission to become a lawyer. And that's it. Hey, I'm 60 years old. I'm not going to waste my time on that stuff. But you know, I assume you've learned this as well. There are so many restrictions on felons to get jobs, to get a license. You can't get an insurance license. You can't get a real estate license in San Francisco unless you get an exemption, to the standard, because the standard says no, you can't get one if you're convicted of a felony.
Yeah.
So it's a really challenging process once you come back, and for me, that's meant that I've done a lot of stuff. Whatever I can get, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I understand. I understand. I do. It's people ask me like, what do I do for a living? I mean, I don't really, I always joke. I'm like, well, I don't really have a job, but and they're like, well, how are you, how do you pay your bills? And I'm like, well, I paint, I do YouTube, I get paid to do, to do talks. I get paid to do, like it, no one thing pays my bills. It's a little here, it's a little there, it's a little, and at the end of the month, it's enough to pay all my bills. Like, it's not like there haven't been really any months where I've been like, I don't have it. Like, I've been lucky. I have it, but I don't ever have it to the point where it's like, I can get my credit cards paid off. I could pay off my car. Like it always just seems to be, I'm like, oh, I'm doing really well. Oh, I'm doing really well. Oh, it just keeps happening. It's like, every time I get ahead, suddenly my $950 car insurance is due. It's like, what that came out of nowhere, So it's it's an issue. I just and the I have in the federal system, when you get out, you typically go to a halfway house. Then you have I have, every crime's different. I have 5 years of supervised release, which is that it's not parole. It's like probation. You have a probationary period. Because of my crime, I have a 5-year. Most of them are 2 to 3 years. Mine's 5. So I have a 5-year, term of a supervised release, and I have all these restrictions. So I'm not allowed to do this. You can't work in development. You can't work in real estate. You can't work in finance. You can't work in construction. You can't work. It's like, I mean, by the time you're done, it's like, so McDonald's, they're like, yes, but not as a cash register or as a cashier. Like, you have to work in the back, with the fries. It's like, I feel like I can do more than that, but, so I started doing stuff, I'm selling my books, and I sell paintings, and I do YouTube, and I do talks. And so, yeah, I hear you, I get it. And what's even worse is that I have like a probation officer who's watching me.
Oh yeah.
So if suddenly I went to work for a finance company, that'd be an issue. She would very quickly come in and say, what are you doing? You can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, trust me, that first 2 years I got out of, you pee in a cup, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not just talking to you. They're inspecting where you live. They come into your home, and I'm a proud man. So, for example, in the state system, you can't travel more than 50 miles from your county of residence without permission. Um, I'm too proud to ask permission.
I hate asking
I,
for
I won't. I won't do it. I didn't do it. I said, "I'm fine. I'll just stay in fucking San Francisco until the 2 years are up. Then I'll travel without having to ask permission because I just couldn't do it."
I travel almost every month.
Wow.
And I have to ask almost every month. I have to fill out a form, send it in. Then I don't hear from her for 3 days. Then I have to send another hey, I'm supposed to be leaving. I need permission. Then, oh, I'm sorry, I missed this. Yeah, that's fine. And I've been denied before. Imagine asking to go to Atlanta and being told no. What do you mean?
Yeah,
No?
I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't
Like,
do it.
this is for work. Well, the answer is no. It's like,
Well, and for me, it was a double bind because I mentioned my kids were young when I went to prison. They were teenagers by the time I got out. So I had been in prison half their lives. But I worked to make sure my kids did well, even though I was in prison. So, for example, my son, we had to take my son had been going to a private school. We had to take him out and put him in public school. My kids were living in bunk beds because in half the house, because the other half was being rented out to Airbnb to help pay the bills, right? By the time I got into prison. So,
right.
It makes life difficult. But I looked at my poor son, and he had a mother, a grandmother, a sister, and even the cat was female, right? And then his class was 23 girls and 4 boys. So when I was in prison, I wrote to the 2 private schools that were boys' schools in San Francisco. One of them were conscientious enough to write back, and I worked it out so my son could get an interview. So he spent a couple of years at a private school, Cathedral School for Boys in San Francisco, and then he got accepted at a boarding school. So both my kids, when I got out, my kids were living in Connecticut at school. They come home for the summer, but I didn't get to see them a lot when I got out, and I couldn't go to their school because I was on, I wasn't allowed to travel. So I didn't even get to see him there. This past year was the first time I got to go to my kid's school and see my son play baseball as a senior in high school on the varsity baseball team. To watch my daughter play golf as a sophomore. To go to my son's graduation, to meet their friends. First time ever was this past fall. And that meant a lot to me.
Right.
Meant a lot in May to go to his graduation and be able to celebrate him graduating high school. But I hadn't been able to do that prior to that.
So what are you doing? I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, it's like I'm guessing you don't have kids because I haven't heard you mention them. But
I have one son. He doesn't talk to me.
Well,
period.
You've just hit upon it. My son. So before I went to prison, that year before I went to prison, when I was able to move around, I took him to every Giants game I could, right? The baseball games, so we could have some fun and spend some time together. And we bonded over baseball. In fact, we still bond over baseball. This past summer, we went to 6 Giants games. Our favorite time together. But my daughter, when I went to prison, I was still her daddy that she loved more than anybody. But by the time I got out, I was a criminal that killed somebody. And so she's been much more distant than my son has. It's been much more of a challenge to get back into her life and to find ways that she values it. She didn't talk to me for a while after I got back, or didn't have any desire to see me, even though my son was open to it. But, you can find ways to deal with that. I actually wrote a letter to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a very famous celebrity, right? He runs a museum and he's on TV shows all the time. He does Star Talk as a podcast, and he wrote back, and one of my letters that I wrote to him, he published in his book. But the best thing was when the book came out for publishing, he said, "Hey, Wayne," we kept in touch because I'd ask him for help on how to deal with my kids and how to keep them involved in the sciences and stuff like that. And so we started up a correspondence, and he put my letter in his book, and he says, "Hey, I'm doing a book show. at Davie Symphony Hall, which has 1,500 people, for a book signing. Why don't you bring your kids? And so my son was away at school. I brought my daughter, and he invited her up on stage, and she got to talk with him for 4 minutes. So I was able to do something that showed that it isn't just mom that has value. Dad has given something to your life. Right. Whether it's getting my son into a different school or having my daughter meet a celebrity in the green room before the show and then actually being invited on stage to talk with him during the show. So I've done stuff like that to try to add value. And of course, they know a lot of the work I do in the nonprofit sector to try to help reform the criminal justice system. So these guys, first of all, if they are ready when they get out, to give them an opportunity, but also to help them rehabilitate when they're in prison so they can have an opportunity. Right. I'm on the board of a nonprofit that teaches fatherhood values to guys inside. It's called Man to Man. And they'll be in 3 prisons before the end of this next fiscal year. So then, almost a year in the future. Because these guys don't know how to be fathers. They don't know nonviolent communication. They don't know how, they get frustrated or angry and they lash out. Let's teach them how to communicate nonviolently, both with the mother and with their children. Let's help them develop a connection with their children so they don't become ostracized. Because I know exactly what you mean. My son, there was 18 months he wouldn't visit me in prison because when he transferred to that boys' school, he had a really hard time. And I caused that hard time because the other kids knew, their parents knew, and they told their kids that I was in prison. And, he didn't know how to process that.
No.
Those are real challenges for the kids. So I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah. Those good Christian values that upper middle class America has always seems to be selective. They never seem to jump from the, to be a good person, do the right thing. They never seem to jump to the forgiveness portion of Christianity. It's always used to elevate them in such a way above everyone else. And if you make a mistake, then discard them.
Oh my gosh. And that includes the nonprofit world, unfortunately. I got one website I worked for about 9 months, and they brought me in as a web manager, so help them with their content and post their content. And then they asked me to become a web developer to help them redesign their website. I'm getting paid $30 an hour, right, to do that work. So I said, okay, well, I got to learn some new skills to do this web development. Oh no, do that on your own time. It's like, wait a second, no, if you want me to learn how to do it, I want to get paid, and they didn't want to do that. And then, they brought in summer interns. They said, okay, well, we don't need you to work 18 hours, just work 5 hours. And they said, well, we don't need you at all, actually. So, thank you for your service. And they just terminated. They didn't even give me 2 weeks notice. They just said, hey, we're done with you. Because they still look at you as like they're doing a favor for you by hiring you. They don't look at you as a regular employee that deserves common courtesy of giving 2 weeks notice when you terminate a contract. No. I've seen that, and that's frustrating. But that's the way the world really is. Not all this virtue signaling you see on TV about how everybody's helping everybody and these kumbaya moments. It's a lot more challenging than that.
What always amazed me when I was locked up was that, like, the black guys who have 4 kids from 3 different baby mamas, and and have never paid child support, have just been nothing but abusive and been locked up for domestic violence and all these other things. In that community, those women will grab their kids, drag them down to visitation, will send them money and put money on their books. And it's like my buddies that I made millions of dollars for don't want to talk to you. You want me to come and see you in the prison? Are you serious? Like, they don't want to take your phone call. God forbid if you asked them to actually send you $100. Like, don't even ask that. It's like, I made you, on the last deal we did, you made $150,000. And then when you get out of prison, they don't want to help you at all. No. It was, it blows my mind. I knew guys who were getting out of prison, going to the halfway house, and guys are dropping off money for them. And it's like, but I had nobody to help me. Nobody.
Yeah.
I had written a book, and I had gotten an advance on the book, and I'd optioned the film or the life rights to one of my subjects that I wrote a story on. And they happened, as soon as I got to the halfway house, they just happened to re-option it. So I happened to get a check, like it was a perfect moment. I got a check, and I was able to go buy a shitty car and pay for $300 worth of clothes at Walmart. And then I had a buddy who hired me to work at his gym. Like it was just luck. And I had a friend who was a saint who said, as soon as you get out of the halfway house, you can come live in my spare room. Like, I lived in her spare room with her husband and her 2 kids. Wow. And I slept in the spare room. And I was thankful. I had nowhere to go.
And you get it. They are a saint because they're that rare.
Yeah. Because everybody else was saying, no, I'm sorry. I just can't. They
can't be bothered.
Right.
Is the way it is. Right. They're busy with their own life and where they go. I think the thing I'm most proud of is how well my kids have turned out, more than what I've done. That they're smart, they're educated, they're happy, they got a good life. They don't use what happened to me as an excuse.
Yeah, as a crutch. Yeah.
And that's important for me. The best way, the closest thing I've been able to do to get into my daughter's life is I cat sit for her. So she's got a cat called Milky Way. She likes the space stuff, so the cat's called Milky Way. And so she's away at school now, and so I'm cat sitting her cat. So that's one way I've been able to add value for her. And I'm able to stay in touch with her because she uses a platform called Snapchat all the time. And so I send her a Snapchat of her cat every day. That's shown. The real issue for her is this isn't conscious. This is just the defense mechanism she's developed because she was so hurt by my disappearance that she thinks she can't trust men now because I abandoned her in her mind.
I got
her
that.
Young child's mind, right? I abandoned her. And so I do everything I can to both promise to do something and then make sure I actually do it so that she can learn. She can see by example that she can trust me. She may not feel she can trust me yet, but I think if I stack up enough of these actions where I show her she can trust me, she'll come to the realization that she can trust me. But that's a slow process, and it hasn't been easy, and it's not over. She just told me that I have to ask her permission to interact with her school now. Even though I've been to her school because her brother and her went to the same school a number of times, but that was because it was both of their schools. But now I need her permission. And believe it or not, I'm happy to give her that because I want her to take ownership of her life. But I'm not happy she asked me to.
Yeah.
I thought we were beyond that. But I might not be able to go to Parents' Weekend because she's not sure if she wants me there. So it's not over. But that's my main. I can't help my victim any more than I have, or her family any more than I have. They don't want to talk to me, and that's fine. And I did go through a process called victim offender education and a victim panel, and because one of the sons of my victim had written a note to me on Facebook, and by law I can't communicate with them. But I did go through the process of offering to communicate with them, and had a violence counselor interact as our intermediary. And they said, no, we don't really want to interact at all. And of course, the civil settlement was the best I could do then for my victim's family. But my family, it's a different story.
Right.
I want to interact with them as much as I can. I want to be a true father to my kids as best I can. And I do that. I do that today. I do it every day. And I'll cat sit or anything else I have to do to show my daughter that she can trust me.
So what's the game plan from here on out, just in work and just life in general? Is there a goal, or just continuing to work with the nonprofits, or
No, it's funny you say that. Um, you've heard the term conscious and unconscious, and conscious and subconscious, right?
right,
There's stuff that happens that we don't recognize as happening. Our conscious mind can't see it, can't think
right,
about it. I could say that I was kind of stuck in a pattern of what am I going to do. Um, but my ex-wife just got remarried in July, so just a month ago, and I think that's helped me get unstuck. Um, and not, uh, I'm happy she got remarried. I want her to be happy. I'm not happy she divorced me.
right,
Um, I would have preferred a love story that transcended my crime to be an example for our kids, but she didn't, so we don't have that. But I want her to be happy, and I'm glad she's found somebody that she wants to spend the rest of her life with. Um, for me, that life is is savoring my freedom, um, and part of that could be solitude. I don't know about you, but I lived in a dorm with 200 other men. I had to listen to rap music for 6 years, for heaven's sakes. And guys who thought they were rap stars, they had to
yeah,
sing. I
yeah,
felt like I was, Simon Cowell, that I wanted to come out on American Idol and tell them to shut up, that they really needed another profession. But, you know, so I appreciate solitude. I got a great apartment in San Francisco. I work hard, but I got my passport. And I think my dream right now is I want to my goal is to become what's called a digital nomad. Um, so, I'm looking at I'm like trading apartments with somebody who right now I'm talking to Paris, uh, uh, London, Paris, Covington, and Rome, right? Where people want to spend a month in San Francisco, and I could spend a month in their place. So I'm hoping to be able to do that.
is there a website or something? Is
Yeah,
that like a web? There's a
yeah, yeah.
Seems
Home
cool,
exchange, it's
right?
called. But yeah,
And it's not going to affect you because you're working basically remotely anyway.
but a lot of the stuff I do, yeah, a lot of stuff I use remote. So I'm looking at doing that as a way of kind of doing what I want to do. Um, uh, yeah, it's you mentioned that you've written books. I admire you. The main thing I've gotten to is writing articles. Some of them long, like 10,000 words, and a lot of them short. I post them on a platform called Medium, and Medium allows me to. I've got over 70 pieces on there about kind of my journey, um, and my recovery uh, to become a better person than I was, that allowed me to commit my crime at the time, and to make sure I wouldn't do something like that again. Uh, is an important story for me, and I share it that way. It's kind of my creative writing way, and um, that's been a good mechanism for me. I make a little money on that as well because it's behind a paywall, right? So you get paid for people to
Right.
read your stuff. But so I'll continue to do stuff like that. But no, I haven't found my home yet. In the nonprofit world, I'm a white straight male. Um, Nobody wants to hire a white straight male anymore. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just being honest, right?
Right.
If I claimed I was transitioning, I'd get a job. How's that?
Yeah.
Um,
Might be
uh,
worth it.
but I'm not going to do that. Play that game. Um, I am what I am, and if they
Yeah.
don't, if they feel they need more diversity, I get it. I'm not going to tell them otherwise.
How often do you write now? Or
Oh, all the time. I'm
oh,
writing a piece right now. The reason I knew how many jobs I worked before is I'm writing a piece called 26 Jobs. And I'm writing about the challenges of finding work once you get out of prison, and how that's systemic. It's not just me, it's not just you. I think your average earnings decrease by like 40% if you've been convicted by a felony over your lifetime. Um, it's systemic.
mm,
Uh, and so helping people to know about that as part of the message. I just wrote one on compassionate release in the federal system, because people don't understand just how twisted and broken the system is. How let's call it institutional racism, because a lot of the poor people are black, and so they're the ones that are impacted the most. But it's institutional in that the system is set up to make it impossible for you to say goodbye to your family if you have a terminal illness. It's heartbreaking. I published that last month. So yeah, I write stuff all the time.
Have you thought about, well, I was going to say, I know a guy, Walt Pavlo. I don't know if you know who Walt is. Anyway, he writes for Forbes magazine, and he was incarcerated. I think he did like 2 or 3 years. He was involved in MCI, and I think he did a few years, and he got out, and he of course does prison consulting, and he taught at MBA not taught, but he does speeches at MBA programs, and now one of the things he does is he writes for Forbes. Or for Forbes.com.
Gotcha.
He's written a couple articles on me. It's so I don't know if that might be another avenue for you, but
yeah, I've done writing for a number of publications. So there's one thing you do in the gig economy out here. It's called Upwork. So Upwork, they post these jobs online and you can bid on them. Right?
Yeah, I've used it.
Have you?
Yeah.
I've written reviews. One of my jobs was to write a bunch of reviews for dog vitamins. Okay, I've used Upwork to write stuff. So yeah, there's stuff out there that you can make a little money on.
Yeah, I've hired a editor one time for one of my books I wrote. All the books I wrote were on other inmates.
Gotcha.
So they were all nonfiction, and
well, I've stayed away from that. My best friend in prison, he called me this morning. Is a guy who pretended to be a Rockefeller for 20 years and got away with it. He got married and had a child as a Rockefeller. His wife was a partner at a firm called Bain Consulting, which is one of the premier consulting firms in the world. She's making over $1 million a year at Bain.
I think I saw a
documentary. She didn't know. Oh yeah, he's been on TV. They've had books about him. They've written books about him. He's done movies about him. All kinds of shit. Guy's hilarious. He's actually German.
Yeah.
Came over here as a child, grew up in Wisconsin, went to California, and then adopted this Rockefeller persona permanently when he went back east to like Massachusetts.
Isn't there a body associated with that crime with him?
Oh my God, no. He was the way they found him was he was getting a divorce from his wife and he kidnapped his daughter.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
So So
like this, like there's somebody involved in this whole thing disappeared.
My best friend. Well, what had happened was they found out that 20 years before this, that there was a couple that he had been living in their pool house, and they disappeared, and then he disappeared and showed up back east as a Rockefeller. So they just, they ended up convicting him of those murders.
Right.
And so he's in prison as a lifer, it's called. And a lifer is kind of a weird term. California has 3 times as many lifer prisoners than Texas. Okay, so it's a big issue. So these are guys who are sentenced to a set sentence, and then they have an indeterminate life sentence, it's called. So they could be sentenced to 20 years to life, which means they have to serve 20 years. But after that, if they can be found suitable by the parole board, they're able to get out and be on parole. But almost nobody gets found suitable. I knew one guy who had been in for 20 years for a murder, was found suitable by the parole board. The governor at that time revoked his parole, so they didn't give it to him. He ended up spending 38 years in prison, even though he'd already been found suitable at 20 years. So guys spend a lot of time in prison. And so anytime those guys want to stay in touch, I help them out as much as I can. I call it the lifer discount. I tell them, call me anytime if they need a subscription to a magazine, if they need some money on their books to get something they want to buy, I'll do it for them. Because I knew I was going to get out of prison.
Right.
They don't. They literally could be there until they die. And that's
What's interesting
I don't
about
think that's justice. Let's put it
what's
that way.
interesting about murders is that it's the lowest they have the lowest recidivism rate. You know, like, I mean, these guys you get out, there's almost no chance they're ever going to do anything again.
That's right.
You know, so if your goal is keeping society safe, you know, letting them out isn't the option. You know, or I'm sorry, isn't the issue. Like there's almost no chance at all they'll ever do anything again. So, well, we want to keep society safe, but you're really not. Like that's a bad argument. You
Oh, not
know,
only are you not keeping them safe, in California, it costs $130,000 a year to keep somebody incarcerated.
right? So you're
By the way,
costing,
the federal system is like 35 to 40,000. It's a
right,
lot cheaper in the federal system. In California, it's 130,000. So not only are you keeping them out of society, which costs them something, let's say, or maybe it doesn't really keep society safer. It's costing you $130,000 a year to do it.
right.
I mean, it's insane. And that's a
Um,
California issue, right? Every state's different, but that's how much it is in California. And we got over 100,000 guys in prison in California. It's a big number.
hmm. um, okay. So, I mean, do you have anything else you want to talk about, discuss?
Um, I I think the main thing is just that give people some hope that whatever trauma they experienced, whatever went through that had them develop these defense mechanisms and habits that got them into prison, um, that they can dismantle those habits and defense mechanisms if they want to. It's not easy. It takes time and it takes work, but they don't have to stay a violent criminal. They don't have to stay an addict. Um, they don't have to stay someone who adopts other people's personas and becomes a fraud in different ways. They can get out of that if they want to. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can do it.
Right.
And that there's a clear path to doing that if you're willing to try. The main thing is read the San Quentin News. We got it online. I'm still the web manager for those guys. So we get over 10,000 hits a month. People read the newspaper to give people some idea of some of the programs and some of the stories of these guys who successfully um, learn something in their prison sentence. And then when they get out, become what are called returning citizens. Nobody from the San Quentin News has ever gone back to prison, by the way, after they got out. Zero recidivism for the guys who worked on the newspaper. So,
Huh.
so they're good role models to a community that needs them. Um, uh, so I guess that's the main thing. SanQuentinNews.com. It's called, all one word, easy to find. And if anybody wants to hear more about these things, that's where I go.
Hey, I appreciate you guys checking this out. And if you like the video, do me a favor, hit the like button and hit the bell so you get notified of, subscribe to the channel, of course. Hit the notification bell so you get notified of videos like this. Leave a comment for me in the comment section and I will try and respond. I respond to a bunch of them. And I really appreciate it. And thank you very much. And I will see you.